Well, today I'm going to talk very briefly about Creative Limerick, just the lessons we've learned over time, some examples around Creative Limerick, and just looking very briefly at business plans for yourselves going forward. Creative Limerick was set up and it's considered a partnership with our department. I'm in the Department of Economic Development and Planning in Limerick City and County, and it works with the third level colleges and creative industries, commercial letting agents and property owners in the city. And really what it was set up to try and fill empty retail premises in the city centre and put a bit of life into them. Particularly Limerick has the Limerick School of Art and Design. We have a very strong arts element, but it's not actually widely known. Now the City of Culture hopefully will change that next year, but it's a chance for us to showcase the fact that Limerick has an arts heritage, different to what you'd usually hear about Limerick, and to try and fill all the empty spaces that had grown up during the Celtic Tiger, some of which had never been occupied. So up to now we've had graphic designers in, milliners, fashion designers, we have galleries, studios and spaces for exhibitions, we've had dance classes taking place, we have arts collectives, Ormiston House, which is a very interesting gallery. We currently have an actor stroke writer who's doing a residency. I don't know if he's living, performing or writing at the front of the building, but he's there and the lights are on, and a puppeteer. This is a pop-up definition I found when I was looking for some material for this, and in this definition it moves into a commercial unit for a short period of time, generates publicity and attraction to the unit through strategic guerrilla marketing campaigns, quickly establishes a vibrant customer quota, monopolises that quota and closes down generally a couple of months to a year after opening. Now what I found very interesting about this was the term short period of time, because what we've ended up with is a lot of people who set up for a short period of time and are now trying to become longer term businesses or sustainable, which has generated a new set of issues for us, and it's something for you to be aware of. Are you pop-up? Are you temporary? Where's it going to go next? You know, is it something that when you set up initially that you're thinking already where's it going to go, or what's going to go in here next? Because again, the whole, I think, interesting point of this is it's something that's only there for a short space of time. When I looked up again pop-ups, it was actually based on a Japanese idea of something rare and temporary, and you kind of had to be in there at the time. It's cool, you know. So again, that's something you need to think about when you look at heritage in general and its image versus this thing that's in and out overnight. If you weren't there, you missed it. So it's worth thinking about. For us with Creative Limerick, what we found with creating a range, and again, just to go back to the principle, landlords are contacted, they're asked can they make spaces available, and we manage tenants to go into them. That's the simplest way to define it. So if there's a shop unit there, we would approach the landlord and say, we have X number of people on our waiting list, we think this is the best place for them, will you take them for a short space of time? They don't pay rent and the premises are given back immediately. I'll talk about that a bit more. But for us, the benefits of having this initiative in Limerick was, for us it kept arts graduates in the city and their social circle. So this is a whole thing you see about gentrification of urban centres. We want people to live in the city. We want it to have a cultural life for people, that there's a benefit to living in a city as opposed to moving out. Again, within urban regeneration, we found it's great in that it populates the streets at night. There's lots of art launches at night and people move from one to the other because the exhibitions are changing constantly. So once a month you could actually have 4 exhibitions opening on a Thursday night. One starts at 5:30, 6 o'clock, and they just move around and drink wine. But it also does bring a nice bit of life to the city centre. We've increased footfall to the city centre. One of the landlords was so impressed with the footfall that it generated on a new street that had been empty that he's given us more premises for the next 3 years, because he said he would never have let the 3 premises on that street without people being in those premises, making them alive. Environmental improvements, in the sense that I suppose people think of derelict buildings, but just having someone going in, cleaning the windows, cleaning the street outside, making the place look presentable. You've all seen yourselves a sign with, you know, a to let sign or for sale, and the place just looks dirty and unkempt in the city centre. Ends up with fly posters, bit of graffiti. It can go downhill very quickly. For us, it's improved the cultural offering in the city centre for tourists. there's a what's on now that wouldn't have been there before, and they're free activities as well. And again, it's something for residents that they can go in and see, because it's changing a lot. And I suppose that's why I keep coming back to the idea of short term and changing, because it gives you something new all the time. If you put a museum in and it's going to be the same thing for a year, 2 years, and you're relying on your local population, they get bored very fast. Economic startup boost, it's a chance for people to try new things. So if you were to put in, for instance, a pop-up exhibition or a museum that was selling some crafts, someone could try their stand out there. There are spin-offs for it. And what we have been doing as well in Limerick, and I say we, it's the actual people involved in the scheme, they've been giving experience to graduates and interns. So they've actually taken on interns and provided experience and work experience for them, and good placements that are quite high profile in some cases. The issue for us with Creative Limerick is it's all things to all people. The people who would like to benefit, or who we need to benefit from it, are the landlords and the owners, the estate agents, the creatives themselves. Within the local authority we have the arts, rates and property departments, and of course next year we have City of Culture. So that's a lot of people who, if you've one empty premises, might think they've a stake in it. So people often ring us up, that premise is empty, will you get it for me? It's not ours, it's the landlord's. Just because it's a really nice premises doesn't mean you're always going to get it. And I suppose that leads me to another question for you here. How many of you have an idea for a pop-up or temporary exhibition in mind? Very shy hands going up. How many people have a premises in mind? Okay, which came first? Because in some cases people see the premises and then get the idea, or vice versa. So that's something to think about for yourselves as well. Don't get too caught up in some premises, though I appreciate some premises may lend themselves to certain types of exhibitions. But sometimes people say, oh, there's a lovely old schoolhouse there, it'll be a great museum, we'll get something in there. So this is back to the temporary nature again. What are you trying to achieve with your exhibition and your pop-up gallery or exhibition or space? And again, the issue for landlords and estate agents is selling it to the landlords, because they're not getting a rent out of this, and the estate agents, who this may be a lot of hassle for. There isn't a rent, so they're not getting a proportion of it, and they're the key holders, and they may be in the middle of a lot of people coming and going. They might have to negotiate with the creative when they want people to view premises. So it's being aware that they have the primary concern in the property. Everyone else would like to occupy it and get an income from it, etc. Based on that, one of our biggest issues has been securing the vacant properties. So the selling points for Creative Limerick for a landlord or an estate agent is that an active premises is an attractive premises. The tenant themselves would provide a form of caretaking, maintenance and security. One of our premises has had 2 leaks that, if it had just been sitting empty, would never have been spotted until the next tenant came to look at it, in which case the building could have been under a lot of water. The security of having someone coming and going each day. Empty shop premises can become points for begging, they can just be broken into, they can have someone living in them, as we've discovered in the past. But it's just that basic day-to-day maintenance of having an active resident in it, or tenant. It's exposure for the property and gets footfall along a street, which benefits the other shops in the area as well. But it just markets that property and showcases what it could be used for. Not just what it has been used for, but it shows it as a space that can be changed around. Making the landlord, a lot of landlords that we've come across are very interested in the city and are keen to offer something to the city. So acknowledging the landlord is very important. In Limerick, it's not the same everywhere, but rates are very important to the temporary nature of these, because if it's a full-time occupant, rates will be payable. So with the landlords in Limerick, they have to pay 50% under the legislation, even if it's vacant. Now, it'll vary in towns and villages as well. So it has to stay at the 50% vacancy rate. The converse of that is the landlords feel quite aggrieved with the local authority because they have to pay 50% rates while they're donating their premises to the city. But I can talk to you more about that if anyone has questions. They have their utilities, their standing charges paid. So if they want to leave the lights on for security, the resident is paying it. They don't have to cut off the electricity. They don't have to put in for vacancy rates on their standing charges. The local authority covers the tenants with insurances under our public liability policy. So we're not going to cover the building burning down, but we will certainly cover someone tripping and falling going into an exhibition or any of those type of concerns. And the legally binding agreement is very important. These properties remain on the market as for sale or to rent, and they will keep their signs up. So as soon as the premises are wanted back and a commercial tenant is available, the landlord gets their premises back in a good condition. I would say the condition we got them in, but some of them are actually better as a result of the work we've done to them. The type of locations that we've had and are looking at, we've an overhead warehouse at the moment that Vicky's going to get plugs fitted to. That's the type of improvements we need sometimes because they haven't always been used for the purposes we're looking at. A video shop. Semi-derelict, well, they were derelict buildings, which are the Opera Centre in Limerick, which was a whole block of mostly Georgian, some new buildings that in Limerick that were taken over with a view to putting a shopping centre there. The council now owns them. So one of the things we're saying is we'll put our money where our mouth is and put some Creative Limerick premises in while we're waiting for further development. Now I'll probably expand on this later, but this is quite difficult for the local authority because one of our fears as a local authority would be that once we have a tenant in, they'll want it to become permanent. And then we'll end up with these permanent incumbents that we were just trying to put in on a temporary basis. And I was very interested when I was at the last presentations in Dublin in Granby Park, because I worked in parks before. And when it was happening, this pop-up park, I said people are going to want that to be permanent. And it is something that people do fixate on, and I think it's really important to identify the reasons you can move and change things and move them on, and give other people an opportunity as well. So the derelict buildings would be one area. Having said that, we've been offered some derelict buildings by landlords that we wouldn't touch with a barge pole because they're just too dear to renovate to a fire standard. We've an office supply shop, that's a studio space, with a brand new retail unit, that's that picture at the top here, that still haven't been permanently occupied. There is a new tenant gone into what used to be a fish shop now, and he's got art classes going on there. We're also using a bus Éireann office, the front part of it, as an exhibition space. So you can be very creative about looking around at the different spaces. What I would say is the best or most cooperative landlords, apart from one investment company, have been receivers, because it saves them the day-to-day maintenance of buildings. They don't really have the potential to go in and out of buildings and caretake them in the way a landlord or an estate agent usually would. So they're some of the more flexible people to work with if you're looking for premises. The established creatives we have at the moment, just to give you an idea again, are Ormiston House, Faber Studios, and they offer internships and residencies. And then in terms of sustainability, a group called Occupy Space got their own funding to provide a more permanent space, which we consider is very important. If it does work, you go off and do it under a different heading. You don't come back to us looking for a temporary space when you really want to be a permanent organisation, because we can't say that you will have that premises in 6 months for your exhibition. And then, interestingly, Occupy Space are also collaborating with the School of Art and Design to do a series of professional practice, because we had artists having exhibitions and they didn't put price tags up. You know, there was some very simple things that came out of it. And I think it was the Heritage Council ran a museums course a few years ago on running small museums on a shoestring. It is very important to check around and see, are there others in the same situation? Like Denise was saying, you'll often get training in exactly what you need if you ask for it and identify who else is around. This particular course, we're looking at the Enterprise Board and FETAC for accreditation for people doing it. We might even look to FOSS in the long term. So it's it'll be interesting to see what grows out of these. Just as a first step at the moment, Vicky's coordinating window displays, Window of Time, and there's another one called Window of Opportunity. And the reason I think this is interesting is it's a foot in the door for us with landlords. We're not asking them for a full premises. We're saying, will you give us your window for a week or a month or however long? And it lets them think about it in a very safe way. Sometimes the premises aren't suitable as well, but their window is. It's I'll talk about rats later, but it gives us from a perspective, if people want to walk in around the city at night, there's something in the windows to look at. And again, it's a changing exhibition. You know, that there's something in our cultural offering, and I suppose I'm coming back to culture because arts, heritage, they're under the same cultural heading. So we would like that to change as well. It builds relationships with creatives. Again, if you're not, and I suppose you would be the creatives in this case, but if we're not that sure about how reliable they're going to be, it's a way of getting them in and building a rapport and a working relationship with someone who may not have a great sense of time, or, you know, and for us it's increased the visibility of the initiative. Now, the window up here is the Limerick Ladies Associates, who have their own windows, one in the city centre and one in Drumcolliher. And again, they're rotating it constantly, and it's great because it just provides this viewpoint. There's a few artists in it together, and they're managing themselves. But it's that rotation, oh, I wonder what's there today. And again, for yourselves, if you're looking at this idea, it might be a very simple way to start. Just a board in a window somewhere, or a piece in a window, and change it around regularly. And you don't have to go into a massive business plan to start off then. It's just a very simple concept that you can work with. What's interesting about increasing the visibility of the initiative is what we have is, you see this blue in the back, down here. We have a giant vinyl sticker we put in our windows of our premises with this logo on it. It's based on the city grid. Vicky worked that out, I wasn't sure what it was about. And it's interesting because some of the artists didn't like it at all. It didn't fit with the aesthetic of the building they were in. And it's interesting because they'd taken such ownership of the buildings they were in that they'd forgotten that if we didn't have them there in legal agreements and insurance, they wouldn't be in the building. So it was interesting from our perspective that, again, you do need to remember the supports that are in place. You may be off running and have a great time, but if those supports go, you won't have an initiative. So it's just bearing that in mind. For us, when we go into a premises, what we have to look at initially is costs, renovations, repairs. We assess a building, we look at the fire safety standards in conjunction with the fire officer, and we have to look at then what's the value return. We could go into premises for a month, we could put £4,000 into making it fire safe, and we'll be out again. So they're the type of issues you'll have to grapple with if you're looking for it on a temporary basis. And what you can do is say, okay, I'm about to put £4,000 into your premises to make it safe, so you need to guarantee me X number of months. You know, and that's just a simple precaution I would describe for yourselves. Because if it is temporary and they get a paying tenant in, then they will want their premises back if you're not paying rent and rates, etc. What I would say is that a lot of landlords do panic, and estate agents say, we need you out because they're going to move in straight away, and they often don't. So I would negotiate that time scale for yourselves. I mean, there was a panic a few months ago about a premises and getting the tenants out, and the landlord was very good and he gave them lots of notice. 4 months later it's still empty and everyone's up and, you know, saying we could still be there. So there are these panics. So try and get yourself a good value return if you are going to be putting renovations or repairs into it. For us, the potential creatives, we manage the application process through an application form, but the big issue for Vicky in particular, meeting the creatives, is managing their expectations. I'm sorry, we don't own that beautiful Georgian building over the river. You won't be getting it. But, and just the reality of, I mean, if you're taking on a building, you're taking on managing that building. One of the issues for us, and I suppose when I mentioned crafts and start-up businesses, is ratepayers in the area. Other people are paying full rates. If you're going to come in as a milliner, for instance, you have to look at the other shops in the area and see, do they sell hats? How will they feel if there's competition in the area? Now, you can say to them, if you're enhancing the offering in the area, it benefits everyone, but it is something to be aware of. There are people paying rates for their commercial premises around you, so if you come in and decide you want to sell tea and coffee, you are undercutting them. So again, that's something to be aware of. And longer term, sustainability will always be an issue if it's something that you decide there is a full-time need for. And actually a good example is this one here. This is a gentleman who offers arts classes. But there are some private studios in town that offer arts classes, pay rent, pay rates. But we weighed it up with them and they were happy enough that there would be a further offering. But you just have to be very careful of those type of issues. The responsibilities for the creatives: responsible tenancy. Please do not drive a car into your party. because it's really cool, which happens in one case. They didn't do anything to the premises, but it is amazing how convoluted it can become. That's a very extreme example, but again, people have moved the for let, for sale signs. You know, it's just being very aware that you have the use of a premises, it's not yours, and negotiating and making sure everyone's fully aware of what's happening. Maintenance, day-to-day maintenance. I'm trying to think of good examples, but it often comes down to cleaning. Please clean the windows. You know, we do look at contributions if there is a lot of work carried out in the building. We need to bring some money back in so we can pay for the next artist going in. So that's an agreement we have with them in a lot of cases, that there is some money put back into the pot for further projects. And the utility payments, again, that's paid through us as the local authority in our case. But it is something that if you're taking over from a landlord, be very aware of. Any small thing can make a difference for them, so paying the bills on time. And being aware that water is metered on commercial premises. It's a commercial concern, so there will be water bills as well as electricity or gas. Now, when I spoke about sustainability, one of the first and most successful projects was the Thomas Street Occupy. It was before my time, actually. But it was a beautiful building in the centre of Limerick. We're from I'm trying to remember who's from Limerick. We have a few. Thomas Street, the big glass building, you'd be aware of it. Like, that took off as it's a very large space that could be broken up. It's lots of glass frontage, great city centre location just up from the pedestrian street. And it took off. There was dance classes, there was galleries, there were studios, and then the building was sold and the premises needed to be taken back very quickly, which left us with a lot of disgruntled artists who needed to be housed, who became even more disgruntled when it turned out that although the building was sold, it was still empty, and it's still empty 2 years later. So they're the kind of issues we deal with on a practical level that we have no control over, because ultimately they're private property. So again, if people are moving towards economic sustainability, you need to look at a project and say, is this an economic project or is it a cultural project? Is it something that should be off looking for support somewhere else? We have a retail incentive scheme. A lot of pop-up businesses now we send straight to there, or else to a market stall, and say we're going to stick with the completely non-profits in our premises. So you do need to look at the different aspects of it. In that sense, financial viability, people need to put in some sort of business plan, even if they're not for profit, to show how they're going to pay for things. What we've also looked at is how we link, and it's again coming back to Denise's point about looking at the resources around you, how you link back into what's in the city. We've set up links now where we have artists selling in our market stalls in the city centre. One of the artists printed some bags for us, so we have that for people afterwards as well. We've urban art projects linked into it. So it's an opportunity to grow things out of it. When I say urban art, we have paintings now on our, ESB boxes. They're often filthy around small towns, you'll see them. So we got some of the artists to do up designs on some of the worst ones. So that stops fly posting and stickers going onto them. And they look great. They really do look great around the place. But again, that was growing out of the links with the artists. So now those ESB, telecoms boxes are artistic projects. Someone else has put a poem on theirs. So again, being creative about the type of things you do. If you have a museum or a pop-up and there's something of particular interest, why not contact the ESB and see where they put it onto their utilities. And it might signpost the way to your exhibition. I'm a great believer in bringing things out of buildings around the city as well. So in the longer term for us, looking at Creative Limerick, our big issue is the landlords don't see a benefit other than the caretaking. And they may see that there's an issue in while there's no issue getting people out, they may think one outweighs the other. So what we are looking at is possibly charitable status to cut on the rates bills, and that's something everyone should be aware of when they're looking at their business plan. Are you eligible for charitable status? Because that will cut the rates bill completely. Core and cluster. Again, this might be interesting for longer term heritage groups. We've decided that what we really need is core permanent spaces that artists can work in, but come into our premises for a temporary basis and go back again. So that if they are in the premises and after 3 weeks the landlord wants it back, they're not left high and dry if they've put a lot of work into it. So that's really when I was talking about occupy space earlier, it's one of the benefits of them getting their own permanent space is they can put residencies in, people, they can plan ahead as a result. Definition of creatives, I suppose that was the difference between the pop-up shop who's a milliner or a fashion designer versus pop-up gallery that may or may not be selling things. It is very temporary and very rare, and it's not competing with someone else. And I suppose in the longer term, we're going to have to look at a cost-benefit analysis of the financial input. Really, what are the benefits of these type of spaces and initiatives? Within heritage, you're building pride in your community, you're giving job opportunities and experience, even if it's unpaid, in your community. You're providing a tourism point, a cultural point. What are the actual benefits? And again, with community development, you can measure things in numbers, but you can also measure softer things like community pride, community cohesion, community ownership, if you're bringing your schools in, your active retirement groups, your youth groups, if you're doing intergenerational projects. So they're important things to learn to measure for yourselves, so it's not always just feet or money. Now, why have a pop-up? It's to get additional interest in something, test an idea. So it could be something for the longer term that you're testing for your community, to assess a market or location, or even to promote that market or location. And seasonality, it might be something you want to put in when you know there's more people around, when the kids are off school, when it's Christmas or Easter or there's something happening. And I think in a lot of cases it's just because you'll see an opportunity. And you know, there might be a premises available, there might be an exhibition available, you could be bringing something that you've seen somewhere else. It'll often be all of these coming together. I mean, again with Creative Limerick, we have a model and people think it works like clockwork. A lot of it's just hard work and luck and opportunities at the right time. Right, we've 5 minutes. So, just for yourselves, getting started, fire safety, do not go near a building until you've checked the fire safety. You'll have to look at your insurance as well. Planning permission. Ideally, in something that's of a temporary nature, you won't be doing anything that will change the fabric of the building. It's not a change of use of the building for the longer term, but it is something you should talk to your planning department about, because change of use means that there is an actual set of regulations around it. Looking at your rates bills, your water bills, if you're taking over a building and paying rent or rates on it, there might be an outstanding rates bill on a premises that has to be sorted out. You don't want to be landed with it as a new occupant. Water bills, as I said, you are in a commercial property. They do pay for water now. The neighbours, make sure you talk to the buildings around you. Make sure you make them aware of what you're doing, what you're trying to achieve. Look at how you can complement one another. One of the biggest things they can do is just keep an eye on you from a security point of view. If you volunteers and you're not regular hours, give them a contact number so they can phone you if there's a problem. And then for yourselves, are you volunteered? Are you staffed? Are there certain things that you should pay for, like the window cleaning? I come back to the basics all the time. I suppose, well, what I was going to do was get you to look at what the type of outgoings you should be looking at as part of renovating the building or going into the building. But these are the outline outgoings I thought you should be looking at. You've got renovation, you might need more power plugs, you might need to check the wiring, you might need to put up a firewall or a fire door of some description. Insurance has to be covered from your own perspective. The utility and energy is the same. Your bins. It's amazing that there are people who think it's okay to use the bin outside on the street. It's not there for that. Advertising, again, people use social media, but it's often something if you want to do your prints, and I think you have a section about funding you can look at, and equipment that you get in. I was kind of laughing because I put the picture of the Mac in. Just because it's available doesn't mean you become the junk shop collecting whatever people can make available. Get the tools that work correctly for the job you're doing. You know, if you want to offer something that's professional looking, be professional about it. Even if it's something that's free, if it's something that's run by volunteers, I would say be professional in your approach. Have a business plan. Look at your outgoings and your income realistically. Don't try and do things on the cheap. If you want to offer something professional, if you're starting off and you want to have a reputation so you can go back next year and do it again. But if we were to look, for instance, at renovating as an outgoing, suppose you need to put wiring in. Who could help you with that bill if you want to do some wiring? who could you approach?
An electrician.
Electrician, yeah. Yeah.
Something. What brought us an electrician, that's what I'm saying now.
So it's looking at your local resources again. In Limerick we have a lot of new ones set up under social services that do small jobs where they're trying to get people back into work. The council might have an electrician. So look around and see what organisations have them as well. Renovation, what else? Painting. Getting someone in. If you are going to have people in as volunteers, try and get them some training built into it in some way. And that's back to your CE schemes, it's back to the different schemes that are there. But what I would say is if you're going to use voluntary time, appreciate it. If it is your brother's electrician who's doing you a favour, be appreciative, mark it in some way. If you are going to use volunteers or people who are on trainee or graduate schemes, make sure they are being trained. You're not just using them as an excuse for cheap labour. You know, there really has to be an opportunity for people. And it's back to what Denise was saying, you know, you can't have one thing profit at the expense of something else. So be very genuine if you are going to use this and say it's a training scheme. Train people. Insurances, who could help you with insurance?
Nobody.
Insurance brokers.
Okay. How about?
Well, the community forum, you can deal with BHP or GLT, and they've a contract with a lot of community fora that if you're a member of the community forum, you get cheaper insurance under BHP or GLT, and they are the two leading insurance organisers that fund community activity. So BHP and JLT, and say that you're a member of the community fora, and you'll get your insurance at a reduced price.
What do those initials stand for?
What does it mean? They're both Dublin-based brokers. Don't know. Just stand for around a long time.
Okay, and as I said, I'm in the local authority, and often departments in the local authority, if it's something that's relevant to what they're doing, they might be able to put it through their own insurance broker. So there are ways of doing that. You can look at the bigger community groups in the areas. It's something they can extend. A landlord might be able to extend it and just put a charge on you, you know, charge it onto you. It'll depend. Utilities and energy, I already told you how to reduce your costs in this. Oh. Do we remember?
Contract to the ESB.
Yeah, well, you can, I mean, you look around, you see who's competitive. But the regional waste office, as I said, will help with things with light bulbs and looking at what's the most energy efficient way to run your building. That's a benefit for the landlord as well if they get someone in who's able to say, wrong type of heating, this is what's sucking your fuel. Bins. How can you reduce your charges on your rubbish?
You recycle.
Now what we'd also say is that there's no such thing as zero waste, so you will have to have something in place. But again, look around at what's available, and the local authority may be able to help you. Or you might do a bin share. It'll depend on how much you have, but just don't assume someone should put it home and bring it home and put it in their bin if it becomes larger. And the recycling aspect is very important. The regional waste office will help again there with bins, etc. Advertising, I don't think you really need me to cover that. Or equipment, I think you'll be okay. Okay. So that was just an idea, but again, what I'm saying, what Denise is saying is, you may be a heritage group, but there's a lot more resources out there. So do spread your net wide at looking at what's around and available for you, and talk to other people in the same business and see what they did. But certainly, I think you should be professional in how you approach it, because there are a lot of practical issues that you will need to approach, and you don't want to be the same person dealing with everything, which is often the case. Who's the practical person? They look after it. And as Denise said, if they're off sick, who's going to come in when the alarm goes off in the middle of the night? Okay, have you any questions?